So if there's some coaches listening to this who think, that sounds absolutely great, like I want to focus on quality over quantity, can you give any people some or share some advice of things that you've tried or things that you've done that have been successful in the past?
Um, my own proudest achievement still, where this is related to this topic, was the team I had in Brazil, Red Canids. I had 7 players. I had a 7-player roster, and all 7 players played in the final. Like I could do 2 setups, so like 2 lineups basically. I could do one that was like very dominant skill check based gameplay with Yoda and BRTT. And then I had a much more calculated map macro gameplay kind of thing with Tokers and Sassi. And Sassi actually is now a Valorant pro. For some that don't know, Tokers also I think went into Valorant. But the training routine I had with them on a daily basis was that everyone except for Tokers, because Tokers said like it didn't really work for him, which I'm like fine with, right? Because like different things work for different people, right? So it's always like trying to find systems that work for that person, because everyone is different, but we also have like a lot of similarities, right? But the other 6 players all had their own training plan where they had their own specific, like for like Monday they were focusing on like economy, right? So getting like 8 to 10 CS per minute and trying to push that higher and higher and higher, basically based on like their how do you say, based on their um, performance and how much CS per minute they were able to get. You try to push that goal higher, you're adjusting those goals, right? And then on Tuesday, it was like very focused. This is kind of like paraphrasing things. Like there were parts of this, but I don't remember exactly like what day was for what. But maybe that was for like 2 days, like the CS 10 CS per minute or whatsoever. Then one's like very laning focused, right? Or where they have to use a certain wave manipulation in order to force a summoner or a kill or something like this, right? And so on. So you can do this with kind of like many things. Like you can work with like bigger concepts like tempo that you want to bring into kind of like scrims. But solo queue can be used for these types of positional training. Like how can we improve your individual knowledge and skills of your own role, and then when you're, because like then you have your sole focus like for your micro on just on your own solo queue games, and when we are doing the scrims, we're purely focused on the teams, and I don't want to bother doing individual stuff unless it's related to the team stuff, right? Or unless it's like it's that big of an obstacle that you have to focus on it, right? It's not that black and white, but it's about the principle of it. So, and then in the team practice, we would have clearly defined goals, like 2, 3 maximum. And then reviews would just be based on those 2 or 3 maximum. If there is additional stuff that players have questions about or that they're struggling with, that is for either a different time, or you take them apart and you talk quickly about these. But like you want them to have very centered. You want to, because I am a big believer of this, like of high focus on quality instead of quantity, and control the intensity of the training. Like I don't care if you're playing 12 games a day. Like what I care about is like what have you learned? Okay, so cool, you've played 12 games a day. Tell me what have you learned in the first 3, then the second 3, and then the fourth 3, like etc. Or like the overall 12 games. So tell me what have you learned, right? Like what did you get out of those games? And I think a lot of players actually are not focused at all, like in the things that they have learned. Like if there would be, this is like an old trick that I always used to do when we were in the same room. Like for example, in Riders in the office, player would be complaining about like a solo queue game, or they're like, oh, like this fucking guy or whatsoever, right? I would be like, okay, cool, but what did you learn from the game? Like, I don't care about this other guy, but what did you actually get from the game? What could you do to increase the odds of the outcome, right? And that's, in my opinion, a very important mindset to have, because you cannot win all games. Like, yeah, you will have inters. Yeah, you will have people that grief you, right? Like, that's just the inevitable. This is part of it. But why waste your time on that when it's a much better spent? And don't get me wrong, venting is good. Like having that emotional outburst is like, get it out of there, right? I think actually a lot of teams could benefit from just having like a punching bag or like a boxing ball or whatever, like in outside of the room, so they can just get their frustrations out. To then like create space in their mind for, okay, now back to like me, what could I do? What have I learned? And all these things, right? And in that routine, so there's just the individual routine and the team routine, and then you still have your start of the week meetings, you have your draft meetings, like basically all the other stuff, right? But fundamentally, when it comes to the skills training, that's just the individual and the team aspect. Separate those very clearly, and set a time limit. Because also what happens when you set a time limit, because so our day would start at 11, for example, and we would end scrims by 8 or 9. And I always said, I don't give a damn what you do after like 8 or 9 o'clock. Like the day is done, day's over, right? Like go do whatever the hell you want to do. Just blow off some steam, rest, and today we start the grind again. But I want the grind to be very high in quality. So then from 11 to 8, so we've done like 8 or 9 hours, right, of training. And I think that kind of at least still falls into the capabilities of what we can do without like hard burning out, right? And by setting the time limit, what happens as well is that you put more importance on the games that you're playing within that time frame, because otherwise you can always say like, oh yeah, we'll play one more, oh yeah, we'll play one more, oh this game was really bad, like it was so useless, so let me play one more. Because then you can always excuse yourself while you're playing the game. Like this can happen either consciously or subconsciously. It's like you can always say, like, you can always kind of like easily give up on the game or find yourself an excuse for not to put in the intensity that you should want to have.
Yeah, I love time limit as well, as opposed to game limit, even though mostly game limit is what's done. Because when you're thinking about time limit, you can again be thinking about kind of what's the best use of our time in terms of, okay, maybe something happened either in the setup or in actually some of the execution in this game that it's not worth, well, it's less efficient than us kind of starting again. But also when you do talk about games, people almost, especially if things are not going well, it's almost like they're like, we end this game quick so that we play the next game, so that we're like done
just
with
go
the
next.
next one.
Go next. Yeah, that's the common phrase that we hear.
Yeah, exactly. And then if you have the opposite, where it's like, okay, if we do 5 games and they're really quick, but we haven't reached our time limit, then we're going to do more work together.
Exactly.
And vice versa.
More games.
Yeah. I think as well that the what did you learn is such an interesting question. I recently, near the end of my my last time working with a team, I started doing my sort of debriefs in a different way. I'm a big fan of structuring the day as much as possible, but having a debrief at the end, and originally started off with the debrief just being one simple question, which is, what did you learn today, like in our scrim set? And everyone had to sort of come up with something just in 60 seconds, like a brief thing. And one of the most important things with it, aside from reminding ourselves of the important stuff, is that it's often really hard. So there's 5 people, 2 or 3 coaches or staff, plus like 5 hours, 5 games of work that we're all doing together. And yet to think, what did I actually learn from this? What am I actually going to what changes based on what we've done over that's a lot of time for an organization. And yet that's actually a very difficult question to answer, a lot of the time.
So where do you think that problem lies of the difficulty?
I think a lot of it comes to how kind of unfocused practice is. And I think that what I see a lot, especially with maybe coaches who haven't thought this through enough potentially, is that it's even more unfocused. But because there's so many variables and so many things that can change within the game, you can, if you're just coming into the day to play a bunch of scrims because we'll get better if we play together, then you can very quickly, you can be talking about different things after every single game. So you mentioned like having goals and stuff like that, I think can be really important. But I also think that, personally, I think that scrims are just often not that useful. They might well be the best that we've got, but they're also not that useful in terms of the control. And what I think, it's much easier to say this now that I'm not working with a team, because it's very difficult to do. But making sure that everyone comes in where individual decisions and things that they take around the team stuff doesn't impact what we're trying to learn, if that makes sense. And trying to keep the practice kind of as focused as possible, and really, really bringing it back to the basics of coaching when we're talking about, okay, we're analyzing a problem, we see what the problem is. Firstly, trying to get the right problem is already really hard in League of Legends. You can quite often think it's one thing and think it's something else. We've seen that with when everyone analyzes teams, they come up with a different, analysis. There's been 100 different people making videos about what's wrong with KC, and they're often different. And who knows?
Everyone riding the train, like,
exactly.
for the content. Yeah,
exactly. I should do one myself at some stage. But yeah, so just going back to the basics. So we're analyzing a problem, then coming up with a plan of how we can actually combat that problem. So right, this is our biggest problem: is how we do this certain thing. How we generate a time advantage, how we generate tempo. And then we come up with a plan of like how we're going to try, not only will this be the goal, but how we're actually going to try and teach it. And then the next stage is sort of how do we set up practice to give us the best chance of learning it. And I think that stage is one that personally I didn't do well enough. And that's one of the great things about this debrief, is it pushed me to do that better. So it's like if we're trying to learn about how we're generating tempo, again, we use that same example, and at the end of the day, none of my players can think of things that they learn around that one topic, then there was something with how I structured the practice that wasn't that beneficial. And I think what happens more often than not is the less points you talk about after each game and the more focused you are, just like you're saying, the more likely people are to come up with a good answer when you ask them, what did you actually learn from the day? And so the times when it was really hard for players to come up with answers, I think a lot of it was because I ended up being not focused enough. And I'd come with, right, I'm going to talk about this and this point, which is based on the goal, which is based on the plan that we've been enacting all week. But when people were saying, oh, can we just watch this fight or can we just watch this thing? I was sort of thinking, well, we've done my bit already, so we can now do the bit for you. And I think there's something in that. But when you were talking about the sponge, it's like that's the opposite of that, Like I'm just adding extra water in because you're asking me to. And so I'm just doing it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's just like an easy trap to fall into, because what we want to prevent is that cognitive overload, right? Like, because if you're focusing on so many things at the same time, like you will have a lot of trouble remembering everything, and it also puts unnecessary stress on the brain where, I need to remember all of these things that like from today and this play and that play, where it's like those things kind of will happen like subconsciously, like your brain will filter that out or process it in some way as long as you have enough rest, right? Or you have time to like do nothing to process, because that's also not a topic where we're so overloaded with impressions, with like phone, social media, all of these things, that we don't really give our brain like room to breathe and to process things. Sometimes the best thing you can do is just stare at a white wall and just sit there for like 10-15 minutes, see what happens, but yeah, the point, the thing you say like about like where players will get like asked, oh, can we watch this fight or can we watch this moment? Like it's like so strongly on their brain because like in their experience, this ruined the game. And I think we also were struggling with this a bit in 2023 Heretics, where we were answering too much to those requests, where we were aware of the fact like, okay, players are asking too much, but they would be so insistent to like really look at this, like they would like their mind would shut down like from whatever information you're giving them. So it's almost like rebellious behavior that they shows like, I will not listen until we watch this, right? Because for them, like it's the worst thing that happened and what ruined the game and the most important lesson was to learn. But trying to ground ourselves from, okay, let's first focus on the goal because that is our intention. Because to me, they're the two most important parts of coaching and performance is intention and awareness, right? So that the intention is very clear, like this is the goal that we're focusing on, and the rest has a lower priority. Although they can be very detrimental to the game that we just played, I first like really need you to wait a moment with that and first focus on the goal, right? So just park it somewhere like a car, it's like park it for now and then we look at it after, right? Because there is always time to do such things, and maybe it does not involve everyone on the team, and you can just do it with like the two people that were involved in that play. Because I don't want to drag in all of the players that like it's not relevant for them. Sometimes it is relevant for them because they can learn something out of it. But if it is a conflict in between two people, which is then a very niche situation or something, then I don't really see the point like in dragging that into an entire team discussion, right? So there's the intention like with the goals, right? And then the awareness, because as you said, you cannot control everything. Like you're still limited to the practice that your opponent is giving as well, or the performance that the players are giving that day, or what mood they're in, right? Like these are all things that we cannot control, and sometimes we have to shift the goals for that day that are still touching somewhat of the subject, or that doesn't sail away too far from the common goal revision. But sometimes you just have to adapt, right? Because the day is just different, the practice is different, or there are things that you're encountering that you didn't know would happen or you would struggle with. So then you just have to be fully in the present and know like, okay, now we have to shift to this to make it both easier for ourselves and work around it. I think the same kind of happens in draft, where if you have a specific scrim goal, you kind of need to adjust your drafts and scrims around it as well, right? Like in order to meet those conditions, because, well, that is just the highly contextual, nuanced way how the game works, right? It's very deeply strategical and very small things that can determine a bigger outcome, right? But we all want to just win draft and play a good draft, let's say, right? So it's this is also kind of an eternal battle that I think almost happens in every single team. At least I've experienced this, like where it's like, okay, guys, we're not drafting to win, we're drafting for the goal that we're having. And then the 1 or 2 days that we have before the match, we will focus on the drafting for that match in order to win, right? So it's like a different way of doing things, but yeah, either emotions get in the way or ego, and this is then where the conflict management comes in, and that both awareness. But yeah, how I usually would, or the preferred way I have with planting the seed of that intention, the best experiments that I've had in teams is again the Riders example. Like I'll probably use it a lot in 2018, where we would start off with a very small meditation or mindfulness session, right? And then we're mostly focused on kind of like visualization exercises or intention exercises. It's like, okay, first, like basically come back to the present, right? Then what does it mean for you to be an athlete, right? Like, or what athlete do you want to become? What can you do today to get closer to that athlete that you want to become, right? These types of questions to kind of like prime the mind a little bit, or focuses the mind a bit into, okay, these are the things that I want to do today in order to get closer to that image that I have of myself, or what it means to be an athlete, or such things, right? And I think mindfulness is one of the you don't have to go like full yogic with yoga meditation or third eye meditation, or I even tried things like focus style meditation like trataka. But in the end, the mindfulness one is the most important one, I think. Most easy to understand and most easy to apply. But in terms of intention and forming the goals for that day, I think it did a lot for that team, at least.
And getting people, it's like you're framing the practice in the right way for it to already, this is the start that will already make it the most productive. And I think that also, a lot of the stuff that we're talking about, it's almost like you have to find a compromise in terms of you mentioned the players, like, I don't know, holding the situation hostage until we've seen our clip or whatever it might be, most likely unintentionally, not like they try to
Sometimes
do that.
intentionally, actually often intentionally, to be
Okay.
honest. But
Okay.
it does happen. Sadly, it
Yeah.
does happen a lot.
Yeah. Um, but yeah, I think making sure that we're really, really clear with exactly what we're doing and why we're doing it, I think can be such a good step in the right direction. And I think, you asked me earlier in terms of what I did that led to, ineffective practice whenever it was ineffective. I think one of the things that is really important and one of kind of covers a lot of the stuff that we're talking about here is there were a lot of times where I got caught up during the season kind of maybe doing too much about the practice that's right now and not doing enough about the planning the practice to come, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, if we're talking about even just analyzing the problem properly or making the right plan or doing the individual plan with the team or with the players, sorry, or having, how we would set up a kind of mindfulness type session, or even going through with the group what kind of things that we might be trying, all of that takes time. And I think you put in the prep as a coach to make it as effective and as time efficient for the group. And maybe I think when I think back to splits where I've been the least successful is when there's like other stress going on and other things going on. And so I'm like, I'm always so busy, but always so, it's like so busy, but so distracted almost in a way where it's like, oh, I have to watch a bunch of the LPL or whatever. And it's on every day. And now suddenly you can watch loads of extra hours just kind of like drift by without making it come back to the team in terms of the efficiency there. If that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, I would refer to like time that you invest that does not really manifest into something like kind of like as garbage time. Like it's very easy to do, I feel, because there's so many aspects of just training a League of Legends team, right? Like you have the gameplay, you have the drafting, you have the conflict management, you have the positional coaching, there are so many aspects that I kind of have to take care of. And then outside of that, there are also other things to take care of, like media and logistics and all of these things, right? So it's just really easy to lose that overview and just start frantically working at something. It's like, oh man, like my knowledge of the game is not good enough. I need to start watching like 3 hours of like VODs again, like on a daily basis. But it's like that's such a huge commitment. Where is it really actually helping you? Like, does it really need to happen, right? Or are there other ways to incorporate, let's say, players more to share their view or understanding of the game, like where things can be structured? Because like I'm just like a big believer of like systems and structurizing, like of things that work with the team.